On a warm spring morning in 2003, in a small Tennessee town where neighbors still waved from porches and children rode bicycles down quiet streets, a young woman named Jessica Morris left her apartment to run errands. She was 23 years old, worked at the local library, and had plans to meet her sister for lunch that afternoon. By sunset, her car sat abandoned on a rural road 12 miles outside town, engine still running, driver's door hanging open, her purse on the passenger seat with wallet and phone untouched. Jessica Morris had simply vanished. The question that would haunt investigators for nearly 2 decades was not whether something terrible had happened, but whether the person responsible had been hiding in plain sight all along. Cumberland County sits in the eastern highlands of Tennessee, where the Cumberland Plateau rises in gentle waves of limestone and sandstone. The town of Fairfield, population just under 4,000, occupied a valley between forested ridges, the kind of place where 3 generations might shop at the same grocery store and Friday night football games drew half the town. Main Street stretched 6 blocks, lined with brick storefronts built in the 1930s, their awnings faded but maintained with local pride. The economy ran on a paper mill 15 miles south, a nursing home that employed 30 people, and the steady trickle of tourism from Fall Creek Falls State Park. Jessica Ann Morris had grown up on Maple Street, 3rd house from the corner, in a white frame house with a front porch that sagged slightly on the left side. Her father, Robert Morris, had worked maintenance at the paper mill for 26 years. Her mother, Linda, taught 2nd grade at Fairfield Elementary. Jessica had one younger sister, Amanda, who was 19 and studying nursing at the community college in Cookeville. Those who knew Jessica described her as quiet but warm, the kind of person who remembered your birthday and brought homemade cookies to work. She had graduated from Fairfield High in 1998, attended a year of community college, then returned home to work at the Cumberland County Public Library, where she managed the circulation desk and ran story time for children every Thursday afternoon. Saturday, April 12, 2003, began like any other spring weekend in Fairfield. The temperature reached 68 degrees by 9 in the morning. Dogwood trees bloomed white and pink along residential streets. The smell of cut grass drifted through open windows. Jessica woke at 7:30 in her 2nd-floor apartment above the pharmacy on Main Street, an efficiency she had rented 8 months earlier when she moved out of her parents' house. The apartment had one large room divided by a bookshelf, a kitchenette with a 2-burner stove, and a bathroom with hexagonal floor tiles that had been there since the building was constructed in 1947. Her neighbor in the adjacent apartment, Margaret Hendricks, a retired schoolteacher who had known Jessica since childhood, heard her moving around that morning. The walls were thin. Margaret heard water running at 7:45, heard Jessica's footsteps crossing the floor, heard the small television click on to the morning news. At 8:20, Margaret heard Jessica's door open and close, heard her footsteps descending the exterior stairs. Through her window, Margaret watched Jessica walk to her car, a 1997 Honda Civic, forest green, parked on the street below. Jessica wore jeans, a white t-shirt, and a denim jacket. She carried a canvas tote bag over her shoulder. Jessica pulled away from the curb at 8:23. Margaret noted the time because she glanced at the clock on her microwave while pouring her 2nd cup of coffee. Jessica drove north on Main Street, turned left on Cedar, and headed toward the Walmart on the edge of town. This was confirmed by a receipt found later in her apartment, time-stamped 9/06, showing purchases of laundry detergent, bread, milk, and shampoo. The cashier, a 16-year-old named Brittany Coleman, remembered Jessica because they chatted briefly about a book Brittany was reading for English class, a book Jessica had recommended. Jessica left Walmart at approximately 9:15. Security footage showed her loading 2 bags into her trunk. She pulled out of the parking lot heading east on Highway 70. What happened in the next hours remained unclear, a gap in time that investigators would later scrutinize minute by minute. Jessica had mentioned to her mother on Friday evening that she might drive to Cookeville, 20 miles east, to look at a bookshelf advertised in the classifieds. Her mother had said, "Be careful on those back roads." Jessica had laughed and said, "Mom, I've driven these roads my whole life." At 12:15 that afternoon, Jessica's sister Amanda called her cell phone. It rang 6 times and went to voicemail. Amanda left a message. "Hey, just checking where you are. We're supposed to meet at 1, remember, call me." Amanda called again at 12:45. Again voicemail. By 1:30, Amanda called her parents. Linda Morris felt a flutter of concern but tried to remain calm. "She probably lost track of time," Linda told Amanda. "You know how she is in bookstores." But Linda called Jessica's cell phone at 2 o'clock. Voicemail. She called again at 2:30, again at 3. At 3:45, Robert Morris drove to Jessica's apartment. The landlord let him in. Nothing seemed disturbed. Jessica's bed was made. Dishes from breakfast sat in the drying rack. Her laptop sat closed on the small desk by the window. Robert called the Fairfield Police Department at 4:10. The dispatcher asked if Jessica had a history of disappearing, if there had been any recent arguments, if she might be with a boyfriend. Robert said no to all of it. The dispatcher said they would send an officer over. Officer David Warren arrived at Jessica's apartment at 4:30. He was young, 26, only 2 years on the force, and he approached the situation with the standard protocol for missing persons. He asked about Jessica's habits, her friends, her routines. He took notes. He suggested that Jessica might show up by evening, that young people sometimes lost track of time. But Robert Morris looked him in the eye and said, "Something's wrong. I can feel it. This isn't like her." At 6:47, as the sun dropped behind the western ridge and long shadows stretched across Highway 70, a farmer named Eugene Taylor drove home from checking fence lines on his property. About 12 miles east of Fairfield, on a stretch of county road that wound through dense woods, Eugene noticed a car pulled onto the shoulder, its hazard lights blinking. He slowed down. The car sat at an odd angle, front wheels turned toward the ditch, as if the driver had pulled over suddenly. The driver's door hung open. Eugene pulled over and got out. He approached cautiously, calling out, "Hello, you need help?" No response. The engine was running. The radio played softly, a country station. The keys dangled from the ignition. A canvas tote bag sat on the passenger seat. Eugene looked inside the car without touching anything. He saw a woman's purse, a cell phone in the cup holder, shopping bags in the back seat. He walked around the vehicle, looking for signs of mechanical trouble, looking for any indication of where the driver might have gone. The woods pressed close on both sides of the road. A creek ran somewhere nearby. He could hear it. Eugene returned to his truck and called 911. Sheriff's deputies arrived at 7:15. The sun had set. They set up flares around the vehicle. They ran the plates. The car belonged to Jessica Ann Morris. Deputy Thomas Mitchell opened the driver's door fully and looked inside. The keys were still in the ignition, turned to the on position. The fuel gauge showed 3/4 of a tank. The odometer read 72,318 miles. A receipt from Walmart lay on the passenger seat next to the tote bag. The cell phone showed 3 missed calls, all from Amanda Morris. There was no sign of struggle inside the vehicle. No blood. No torn fabric. Nothing broken. The car looked as though someone had simply stepped out intending to return in a moment. Deputies searched the immediate area with flashlights, calling Jessica's name into the darkness. They walked 50 yards in each direction along the road. They shined lights into the woods, into the ditch, across the creek. They found nothing. At 8:30, Sheriff William Bradford arrived on scene. He stood by the open car door, looking at the keys in the ignition, at the purse on the seat, at the shopping bags in the back. He had been sheriff for 14 years. He had seen people disappear before, but usually there were explanations. Family disputes, mental health crises, planned departures. This felt different. This felt wrong. By 9 that evening, the parking lot of the Fairfield Police Department had filled with volunteers. Word spread fast in a small town. Robert and Linda Morris stood in the harsh fluorescent light of the department's main room, answering questions from investigators. What was Jessica wearing? Did she have any medical conditions? Had she seemed upset lately? Had there been any threats, any strange encounters, anyone following her? The answers were all no. Jessica had been happy. Jessica had been fine. Jessica had simply gone to run errands. Search teams fanned out at first light on Sunday morning. Volunteers arrived in pickup trucks and SUVs, bringing thermoses of coffee and walking sticks in grim determination. They searched the woods on both sides of County Road 116 where Jessica's car had been found. They walked in lines, arms length apart, looking for any sign: torn clothing, disturbed earth, broken branches. The Tennessee Bureau of Investigation sent cadaver dogs. The dogs alerted in several locations near the creek, but no remains were found. Divers searched deeper pools. Helicopters flew overhead, scanning the forested terrain with thermal imaging. By Sunday evening, over 200 people had joined the search. By Monday, that number grew to 500. The investigation moved quickly but found little. Jessica's cell phone records showed her last call had been an incoming call from Amanda at 12:15. The phone's GPS had been off. Investigators interviewed everyone who had seen Jessica that morning: Margaret Hendricks, Brittany Coleman at Walmart, the gas station attendant who might have seen her car pass. They created a timeline. They mapped possible routes. They checked traffic cameras, though few existed on rural roads. They found nothing that explained the gap between 9:15, when she left Walmart, and 6:47, when Eugene Taylor found her car. Those who knew the area said County Road 116 was not on the route to Cookeville. It looped south and west, through farmland and forest, eventually connecting back to Highway 70 several miles from town. Someone had suggested to investigators that Jessica might have taken the scenic route, might have been exploring. But her family said that didn't sound like Jessica. She was practical. She took the most direct path. Why would she drive 12 miles out of her way on back roads? By the end of the first week, tips began to come in. Someone claimed to have seen Jessica at a rest stop near Nashville. Another caller said they saw a woman matching her description at a bus station in Knoxville. Every lead was followed. Every lead went nowhere. Investigators began to consider darker possibilities. Had Jessica been abducted? Had someone followed her from Walmart? Was this random or targeted? The open car door, the running engine, the untouched purse. These details suggested something sudden. Something that had interrupted her in the moment of either arriving or departing. Deputies whispered quietly among themselves about the strangeness of it. One deputy noted that the car had not run out of gas despite the engine being on for potentially hours. Another pointed out that Jessica's shoes, a pair of white sneakers, had shown no mud or debris, suggesting she had not walked through the woods. The interior of the car was clean, almost too clean. There were no defensive wounds mentioned in the missing person report, no signs that Jessica had struggled or fought. It was as if she had simply evaporated. Part 2. The investigation. The search operation expanded throughout the following weeks. The Tennessee Bureau of Investigation established a command center in Fairfield, operating out of the community center on Pine Street. Maps covered the walls, marked with search grids and timeline notations. Investigators divided the area into quadrants, each assigned to teams with specific instructions. They searched abandoned buildings, old wells, mine shafts in the limestone ridges. They drained a pond on private property 3 miles from where the car was found. They used ground-penetrating radar in areas where the earth looked recently disturbed. They found nothing. The community responded with an outpouring of support that was both touching and overwhelming. Local businesses donated food for search volunteers. The Methodist Church organized prayer vigils. Jessica's photograph appeared on flyers stapled to every telephone pole, taped in every shop window. The local newspaper, the Cumberland Chronicle, ran daily updates on the front page. Television news crews from Nashville arrived, broadcasting live from Main Street. The story spread beyond Tennessee. Young woman vanishes, car found running, no trace. It had all the elements that captured public attention. As the investigation deepened, small inconsistencies began to emerge, details that didn't fit the narrative of random abduction. Investigators learned that Jessica had been dating someone, a fact her parents had known but hadn't thought relevant initially. His name was Michael Brennan. He was 28, worked construction, had moved to Fairfield 2 years earlier from Memphis. Jessica and Michael had been seeing each other for about 6 months, though they had kept the relationship relatively quiet. Michael lived in a rented house on the south side of town, a small bungalow with peeling paint and an overgrown yard. Investigators interviewed Michael on Monday, April 14th, 2 days after Jessica disappeared. The interview took place at the sheriff's department. Michael sat in a plastic chair in the interview room, wearing work boots and jeans stained with drywall dust. Detective Sarah Klein conducted the interview. She began with basic questions. How long had he known Jessica? When had he last seen her? Michael said he had last seen Jessica on Friday evening, April 11th. They had dinner at her apartment, nothing fancy, just pasta and salad. He left around 9. She had seemed fine, happy even. They had talked about maybe driving to Nashville the following weekend to see a movie. Detective Klein asked where Michael had been on Saturday. Michael said he had worked on a job site in Cookeville, a house renovation, from 8 in the morning until around 4 in the afternoon. He provided the address, the name of the homeowner. He said he had been there alone because his usual partner was out of town. After work, Michael said he went home, showered, and then met some friends at a bar called the Horseshoe on the edge of Fairfield. He stayed until around 11, then went home and went to bed. He learned about Jessica's disappearance on Sunday morning when Linda Morris called him. The alibi seemed straightforward, but investigators checked every detail. They spoke to the homeowner in Cookeville, a man named Richard Hayes, who confirmed that he had hired Michael to renovate his kitchen. However, Hayes said he had not been home on Saturday. He had been visiting his daughter in Chattanooga. He had given Michael a key and told him to work at his own pace. There was no way to confirm exactly when Michael had been at the house or how long he had stayed. Investigators visited the Horseshoe. The bartender, a woman named Sheila Monroe, remembered Michael coming in on Saturday night. She remembered because he had sat alone at the bar, drinking beer and watching a Braves game on television. But Sheila couldn't remember what time he had arrived. She thought maybe 10, maybe later. The bar had been busy. Michael's friends, 2 men who worked construction with him, confirmed they had been there Saturday night, but they hadn't arrived until after 10:30, and they weren't sure exactly when Michael had shown up. One friend said, "Michael was already there when we got there, already a couple beers in." Detective Klein noted these inconsistencies in her report. The timeline didn't quite work. If Michael had been in Cookeville working until 4, then drove back to Fairfield, a 40-minute drive, he would have arrived home around 4:40. Shower, change, maybe grab something to eat. That put him leaving for the bar no earlier than 6:30 or 7. But Jessica's car was found at 6:47, 12 miles outside town. Could Michael have encountered Jessica somewhere between 4 and 6? Could he have met her on County Road 116? And if so, why? Physical evidence proved elusive. Forensic technicians processed Jessica's car thoroughly. They dusted for fingerprints, finding Jessica's prints belonging to her family members, and several unidentified partials that could have belonged to anyone who had touched the car at any point. They vacuumed the interior for hair and fiber. They found nothing unusual. They checked the trunk. It contained a spare tire, a jack, and a blanket. No signs of struggle. No blood. The shopping bags from Walmart sat undisturbed in the back seat. The items inside exactly as they appeared on the receipt. Investigators searched Michael Brennan's house on April 17th. They obtained a warrant based on the inconsistencies in his timeline and his relationship with the missing woman. 6 officers arrived at 7 in the morning. Michael stood on his porch in boxer shorts and a t-shirt, watching them carry boxes out of his house. They took his computer, his cell phone, his work boots, several articles of clothing. They photographed every room. They searched his truck, a 1995 Ford F-150, dark blue, dented and rusted. They found construction tools, empty coffee cups, fast food wrappers, nothing that connected him to Jessica's disappearance. Those who knew Michael described him as quiet, sometimes moody, but not violent. His landlord said he paid rent on time and kept to himself. Coworkers said he was reliable, showed up on time, did good work. But there were small stories that began to surface. A woman who had dated Michael briefly the previous year told investigators he had a temper. She said he had never hurt her physically, but he could be controlling. He wanted to know where she was, who she was with. He called her repeatedly. She ended things after 3 months because it felt suffocating. Another acquaintance mentioned that Michael drank heavily sometimes, got morose, talked about feeling like life had dealt him a bad hand. The investigation slowed as spring turned to summer. Tips continued to come in but led nowhere. Psychics called offering visions. Conspiracy theorists posted on internet forums about government cover-ups and human trafficking. The Morris family appeared on national news programs, pleading for information. Linda Morris sat on a television soundstage, her hands folded in her lap, her voice steady despite the tears in her eyes. She said, "Jessica is loved. She is missed. If anyone knows anything, please come forward." The image of Linda's face, dignified in grief, circulated widely, but no new information emerged. Investigators interviewed Michael Brennan 3 more times over the following months. Each time he maintained the same story. He had been working in Cookeville. He had gone to the bar. He didn't know what happened to Jessica. In one interview, Detective Klein asked him directly, "Did you have anything to do with Jessica's disappearance?" Michael looked her in the eye and said, "No, I loved her. I would never hurt her." His voice was steady. His hands didn't shake. He met her gaze without flinching. But deputies noticed things. They noticed that Michael never asked questions about the investigation. When family members of missing persons were interviewed, they typically wanted to know everything. What leads were being followed, what evidence had been found, when would she be coming home? Michael asked nothing. He answered questions but volunteered little. In one interview, he barely reacted when told that Jessica's car had been found with the engine running. Most people would express surprise, would ask how that was possible, would speculate. Michael just nodded. By autumn of 2003, the active investigation had largely stalled. The TBI reduced its presence in Fairfield. Search operations ceased. The case was not closed, but it was no longer a daily focus. Jessica Morris joined the grim roster of unsolved disappearances, her case file growing thicker with dead-end leads and unanswered questions. The community tried to move forward. The flyers on telephone poles faded in the sun and rain. The news crews stopped coming. But Jessica's parents couldn't move on. Robert Morris drove County Road 116 every week, looking for something, anything that might have been missed. Linda kept Jessica's room exactly as it had been, the bed made, the books arranged on the shelf. Part 3. The Silence. 3 years passed, then 5, then 10. The case grew cold in official terms, though it never grew cold for those who loved Jessica Morris. Her family marked each birthday she would have turned, each holiday she should have celebrated. Amanda Morris finished nursing school, got married, had children of her own. She named her daughter Jessica. Robert Morris retired from the paper mill. Linda continued teaching, though colleagues said she was never quite the same, that a light had gone out behind her eyes. The town of Fairfield changed in subtle ways. New families moved in. Young people graduated and left for cities with more opportunities. The pharmacy below Jessica's old apartment closed, replaced by a vape shop. The library where she had worked hired new staff, but older residents remembered. They remembered the search parties, the prayer vigils, the way fear had settled over the community like fog. Parents held their children closer. Women checked their back seats before getting in their cars. The absence of answers created a wound that wouldn't heal. Michael Brennan remained in Fairfield for 2 years after Jessica disappeared. He continued working construction, though some contractors stopped hearing him once word spread about his connection to the case. He was never arrested, never charged, but suspicion followed him. People whispered. They crossed the street when they saw him coming. In the summer of 2005, Michael moved away. Some said he went to Kentucky. Others heard North Carolina. No one knew for certain, and few cared to find out. For those who have ever doubted someone you love, who have felt the gnawing uncertainty of not knowing whether to trust your instincts or trust the person standing in front of you, the Morris family's experience resonates with particular pain. Robert and Linda sometimes talked late at night about Michael Brennan. Robert believed, deep in his gut, that Michael knew something. Linda wanted to believe the best in people. She argued that the police had investigated thoroughly, that if there was evidence against Michael, he would have been arrested. But even she admitted there were things that didn't add up. Amanda Morris struggled with nightmares. In her dreams, she saw Jessica calling for help, saw her trapped somewhere dark and cold. Amanda woke in the middle of the night, heart pounding, and couldn't get back to sleep. She went to therapy. The therapist helped her process grief and uncertainty. But the therapist couldn't answer the question that haunted Amanda: what happened to her sister? Jessica's case file remained open but largely dormant until the spring of 2019. By then, 16 years had passed. Robert Morris had died the previous year, his heart failing, though Linda believed it was really grief that killed him. He had never stopped looking for Jessica, never stopped hopping for answers. Linda was 71, living alone in the house on Maple Street, the house where Jessica had grown up. The front porch still sagged slightly on the left side. In March 2019, a cold case unit within the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation began reviewing unsolved disappearances from the early 2000s. The unit consisted of 3 investigators and a forensic analyst. They applied new technologies to old evidence: advanced DNA analysis, cell tower triangulation methods that hadn't existed in 2003, database searches that could now cross-reference information from multiple states. When they pulled Jessica Morris's file, something caught their attention. The lead investigator, Detective Mark Reeves, noticed the discrepancies in Michael Brennan's timeline that had been noted 16 years earlier but never fully resolved. Reeves was methodical, experienced, the kind of investigator who believed that cases were solved through patience and attention to detail. He decided to locate Michael Brennan and re-interview him. It took 3 weeks to find him. Michael Brennan was living in Lexington, Kentucky. He was 44 years old, working at a warehouse distribution center, living in a small apartment on the east side of the city. He had married and divorced in the intervening years. He had no children. When Detective Reeves and a colleague appeared at his door on a Tuesday morning in April 2019, Michael's face drained of color. He stood in the doorway, still in his work uniform, and said, "I wondered when someone would come." They conducted the interview at the Lexington Police Department. Michael sat across from Detective Reeves in a small interview room with cinder block walls painted institutional beige. A camera recorded everything. Reeves began with soft questions, establishing rapport, asking about Michael's life, his work, his health. Then Reeves said, "I want to talk to you about Jessica Morris." Michael was quiet for a long time. The silence stretched out, broken only by the hum of fluorescent lights. Finally, Michael said, "I think about her every day." Reeves asked Michael to walk through April 12, 2003 one more time. Michael recited the same story he had told 16 years earlier: work in Cookville, home, shower, bar. But this time Reeves pressed him on the details. What time exactly did he arrive at the job site? What did he work on? Did anyone see him? Michael became vague, uncertain. He said, "It's been so long, I don't remember every detail." Reeves presented new information. The cold case unit had obtained cell tower records that had been archived but not thoroughly analyzed in 2003. The technology to pinpoint locations from cell tower pings had improved dramatically. Michael's cell phone had pinged off a tower near County Road 116 at approximately 5:30 on the afternoon of April 12, 2003. That tower was 12 miles from Fairfield, in the area where Jessica's car had been found. Michael stared at the table. He said nothing. Reeves asked, "Why was your phone in that area at 5:30 if you were at home showering?" Michael looked up. His eyes were red. He said, "I need a lawyer." The interview ended. Michael was not arrested that day. There was still not enough evidence for charges, but the investigation intensified. Reeves obtained warrants for Michael's current residence. They found old journals, notebooks where Michael had written long, rambling entries about guilt and shame and mistakes that couldn't be undone. One entry, dated June 2003, said, "I see her face when I close my eyes. I hear her voice. What have I done? God forgive me, what have I done?" The journals were not a confession. They were ambiguous enough that defense attorneys would argue they referred to other regrets, other guilt. But combined with the cell tower evidence, with the inconsistencies in his original statements, with the suspicious behavior noted by investigators 16 years earlier, a case began to take shape. In September 2019, investigators found new evidence. A hiker discovered bones in a wooded area approximately 3 miles from where Jessica's car had been found. The remains were scattered, disturbed by animals and time. Forensic anthropologists determined the bones were human, female, consistent with someone in their 20s. Dental records confirmed the identity: Jessica Ann Morris. The location was significant. It was less than a half-mile from the cell tower that had pinged Michael's phone at 5:30 on April 12, 2003. Investigators believed Jessica had been in that wooded area since the day she disappeared. For 16 years, she had been so close to where her car was found, hidden beneath leaves and forest debris, while search parties walked nearby and helicopters flew overhead. Part 4: The Revelation. The discovery of Jessica's remains changed everything. What had been a missing person case became a homicide investigation. The medical examiner found evidence of trauma to the skull, consistent with blunt force. The manner of death was ruled homicide. The question was no longer what happened to Jessica Morris, but who was responsible. On November 5, 2019, investigators arrested Michael Brennan at his workplace in Lexington. He was loading boxes onto a pallet when 4 detectives approached. They read him his rights. They placed him in handcuffs. Coworkers watched in silence as he was led away. Michael said nothing. He kept his eyes on the ground. The arrest made headlines across Tennessee and beyond. Man arrested in 2003 cold case of missing librarian, the newspapers proclaimed. Television news shows ran segments on the case, showing photographs of Jessica smiling, photographs of Michael being led into the Cumberland County jail. The community of Fairfield reacted with a mixture of relief and anger. Relief that someone had been held accountable. Anger that it had taken 16 years. Linda Morris learned of the arrest from Detective Reeves, who drove to her house to tell her in person. She sat on her sofa, the same sofa where she and Robert had waited for news all those years ago, and she wept. Not tears of joy, but tears of exhausted grief. She said, "I wish Robert had lived to see this." Amanda flew in from North Carolina, where she now lived with her family. She stood in her childhood bedroom, looking at the twin bed where Jessica used to sleep, and felt something she couldn't quite name. Not closure, that word felt insufficient, but perhaps a kind of terrible knowledge. The case went to trial in May 2021. The prosecution presented the cell tower evidence, the journals, the testimony of investigators who described Michael's inconsistent statements and suspicious behavior. They presented the forensic evidence from Jessica's remains, the blunt force trauma, the location where she was found. They built a timeline. Jessica left Walmart at 9:15, perhaps planning to drive to Cookeville. At some point that morning or early afternoon, she encountered Michael. Perhaps he called her, asked to meet. Perhaps he was already waiting on that back road. What transpired between them remains partially speculative, but the prosecution argued that Michael struck Jessica, that she died from the head trauma, that he panicked and hid her body in the woods, then moved her car to make it appear she had stopped there on her own. The defense argued that the evidence was circumstantial. Yes, Michael's phone had pinged near that location, but cell tower data was not precise enough to place him at the exact spot. The journals were the writings of a troubled man processing grief, not admissions of guilt. The defense presented their own timeline, suggesting that Michael had driven that back road on his way to or from Cookeville, and that the cell tower ping meant nothing. They argued that someone else had encountered Jessica, someone unknown, and that Michael was being prosecuted because he was the convenient suspect. The trial lasted 3 weeks. The courtroom was packed every day. Linda Morris sat in the front row, flanked by Amanda and other family members. She watched Michael Brennan sit at the defense table, his face expressionless, his hands folded. She tried to reconcile this middle-aged man with the young construction worker Jessica had dated, the man who had sat at their dinner table, who had smiled and made conversation. Those who have ever tried to understand how someone could harm another person, particularly someone they claim to love, will recognize the impossibility of that reconciliation. Witnesses testified about Jessica's character, her kindness, her reliability. They testified about Michael's behavior after her disappearance, the absence of emotion, the lack of curiosity about the investigation. One witness, a woman Michael had dated briefly after Jessica disappeared, testified that Michael had once said during an argument, "You don't know what I'm capable of." The defense objected, claiming the statement was taken out of context. The judge allowed it. On June 7, 2021, the jury deliberated for 11 hours. They returned with a verdict, guilty of second-degree murder. Michael Brennan showed no reaction. He sat perfectly still as the verdict was read. The judge scheduled sentencing for August. In Tennessee, second-degree murder carries a sentence of 15 to 25 years. Given the circumstances, the judge sentenced Michael to the maximum, 25 years. At the sentencing hearing, Linda Morris was given the opportunity to speak. She stood at the podium, her hands gripping the edges to keep them steady. She looked at Michael Brennan and said, "You took my daughter from us. You took her future, her laughter, her love. You took her from her sister, who will never stop missing her. You took her from her father, who died without knowing what happened to his little girl. I will never understand how you could do this. I will never forgive you. But I hope that somewhere in whatever darkness you carry, you find a sliver of remorse. Michael Brennan was led from the courtroom in shackles. He will be eligible for parole in 2041 when he is 66 years old. The investigation officially closed. Jessica Morris's name was added to a memorial wall at the Cumberland County Courthouse, alongside other victims of violent crime. Her family held a private burial service, laying her remains to rest in Fairfield Cemetery under an oak tree that had been there for over 100 years. The case left questions that may never be fully answered. Why that road? Why that day? What exactly happened in the moments before Jessica died? Michael never confessed. He maintained his innocence even after conviction, though his appeals have so far been unsuccessful. Some believe there is more to the story, that accomplices or additional crimes might be connected. Others believe the truth died with Jessica on that April afternoon in 2003. The shock to the community was less about the arrest itself and more about the years of uncertainty that preceded it. For nearly 2 decades, people had wondered. They had speculated. They had looked at neighbors and friends with suspicion. The resolution brought a kind of grim satisfaction, but also highlighted the limitations of justice. No verdict could return Jessica to her family. No prison sentence could undo the years of not knowing. In the aftermath of the trial, several investigators who worked the original case spoke about the challenges of solving crimes when evidence is limited and time is short. They spoke about the advances in technology that made Michael Brennan's conviction possible, cell tower analysis, and forensic techniques that didn't exist in 2003. They spoke about the importance of never giving up, of keeping cases open, of believing that truth would eventually surface. Jessica Morris was 23 years old when she died. She loved books and children and quiet Sunday mornings. She had plans to travel, to maybe go back to school, to build a life filled with ordinary joys. Those plans were stolen from her on a spring day when the dogwoods bloomed and the temperature was perfect and nothing seemed wrong with the world. Her story is a reminder that violence often comes from familiar places, from people who smile and make conversation and blend into the fabric of daily life. It's a reminder that small towns are not immune to tragedy, that evil doesn't announce itself with obvious signs. It's a reminder that justice, when it finally arrives, can feel both necessary and insufficient. If this story mattered to you, subscribe and hit the bell. Share the episode. Someone somewhere may still be waiting to be heard. Someone somewhere still needs the truth to come to light, no matter how long it takes, no matter how much darkness must be pushed aside to find it. Jessica Morris waited 16 years beneath those trees. Her family waited 16 years for answers. In the end, the truth emerged, carried on the persistence of investigators who refused to forget and a family who refused to let go. May Jessica rest in peace, and may her memory serve as both a tribute and a call to never stop seeking justice for those who can no longer seek it for themselves.